Hi, I'm Melissa Zaroski, and my book is titled My Soul Was Once Yours. It was released in February of 2016. And it's about a girl that is 8 years old in 1985, and she hears a song that she had never heard before, but it triggers memories of a past life. She goes through her entire life having dreams about this singer and about herself as another person. And it follows her into her adult life, and she ends up trying to figure out what the significance is between this life from the 60s and her life in the present day.
Book Lovers Unite. I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1, and each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with Melissa Zaroski, the author of My Soul Was Once Yours. Her book is fascinating because it's dealing with music, nostalgia, the paranormal, the supernatural, basically all the things I find interesting. And I think generally anyone that has a love for music is going to enjoy this book. And it starts right now.
I'll never forget when I first heard his number one hit song, Beverley, in 1985. I was just 8 years old, and it was a warm yet pleasant summer day on the 4th of July in Chula Vista, California. My dad and I were in our backyard. I was swimming in the pool, and Dad was firing up some burgers on the grill. He had his oldies station playing as usual, filling the air with music from decades ago. Long before Madonna and Michael Jackson, before disco dancing in Studio 54, and before hair bands of the 80s dominated the airwaves. The thing was, Beverly hadn't been on the Billboard charts in 20 years. The last time it was repeatedly played on the radio was in 1965. The guitar chords flowed with a haunting melody. The lyrics were sung by a man who had one hell of a vocal range. From a gravelly rock style to a falsetto pitch, his voice caused me to hook my arms on the edge of the pool and just listen. The lyrics to Beverly were melancholy, yet I could almost picture the scene. My darling Beverly, taken so soon from me, your soul is now heavenly, it's where I want to be. Wow. It was sad yet powerful. I won't forget that dreadful night, you and me, we had a fight. I let you go and walk alone. I should have driven you home. I remained still in the pool except for the occasional swirling of my legs in the water. My chin rested upon my arms as I listened to its entirety about a teenage girl who was hit by a car and killed while walking home from her fiancé's house. What was that song called, Dad? I hollered to my father, who was oblivious to my fascination. That was Beverly, he replied, as he flipped the burgers, causing the grease to sizzle on the hot coals. Who sang it? Oh, that was Bobby Eastland. We have his record album in the cabinet. We do? I questioned, not believing I had never heard that gem before. I was notorious for going through all of my parents' old record albums and jamming out to them. I was appalled with myself that I had overlooked Bobby and his Beverly. That song was actually a true story, Dad began as he took a swig of his beer. Supposedly, Bobby and Beverly were high school sweethearts. They got into a little spat one evening when they were at his parents' house, and she left to walk home, which was just a few streets over. He didn't go after her, and it was the biggest regret of his life. She was hit by a car while crossing the street and died on the spot. All right, kiddo, out of the pool so we can eat dinner. Whoa, I replied as I hoisted myself up onto the cement ledge of the pool. Dad scooped up the last burger onto the plate and turned around to go inside. I picked up my towel that I had carelessly thrown onto the pavement and quickly dried myself off. I ran into the house and tossed my towel over one of the kitchen chairs, which my mom scolded me for. Please go hang that up in the bathroom, Melanie, she requested as she finished setting the table with condiments, potato chips, and iced tea that she had soaking out in the sun all day. I did what was asked of me and returned to the kitchen, still in my damp bathing suit. Mom handed me 3 plates to set the table with and some deviled eggs that she had made. Is there celery and crunchy stuff in these? I accused, as I hated anything besides mayonnaise and mustard in my eggs. There was nothing worse than looking forward to the first bite, only to be horribly surprised by the presence of chopped up celery and onions in it. The 2 on the left are yours, the rest have everything you don't like in them, she told me as I crinkled my nose. I truly was picky, there was no doubt about that. I liked everything plain with no fancy add-ins. Nothing on my burgers or hot dogs except meat in a bun. I wouldn't eat fish. I didn't like fruity desserts because, let's face it, it was just a wrong combination. I mostly didn't like onions in any way, shape, or form, or anything with tomatoes, which were just nasty looking. I watched my mom and dad load up their burgers with all the things that I turned my nose up to and gave a little blah. You should at least try it before you knock it, kiddo, Dad said before he took a giant bite. No thanks, I answered as I chewed on my ultra-plain hamburger. Our conversation covered neighborhood gossip and the latest happenings at the hair salon where my mom worked as a stylist. All the while, that song, that voice, was stuck in my head on repeat. Tell me more about Bobby Eastland, I said as I grabbed a handful of potatoes to put on my plate. Bobby Eastland? My mom asked, curious as to why I was asking about him. She had completely missed out on the conversation earlier when Dad explained the story about Beverley. We heard Beverley when we were outside, and I loved it, I answered. Oh, I love that song, Mom started. I remember when we used to hear it on the radio. We have his albums, you know. That's what Dad said. Can you help me find them after dinner? I asked, since I had no idea what the albums looked like. After you help me clear the table and do the dishes, she countered. After we ate and my chores were complete, Mom and I sat down on the living room floor and opened the cabinet that contained all of their record albums. She flipped through them as I watched, not knowing what cover to look for. Many of them I recognized and had listened to repeatedly. Some I just knew the cover and never bothered to check them out. Here we go, she said as she pulled out a bright blue album that I had never seen before. It was one of the many that I never cared to listen to. Oops. She handed it to me, and I saw Bobby's face smiling proudly on the cover. It felt as though a tiny lightning bolt shot through my head, which took my breath away for a moment. There was a familiarity about him that I couldn't put my finger on, but I was immediately drawn to him as if he was the path that led me home. It wasn't a vision in my head, but a feeling from deep within my gut. I knew him, but I didn't. I had never seen him before in my 8 years of life, but something in me said that I had looked into his eyes countless times before. He wasn't what I imagined him to look like to match the voice. Light brown, wavy hair that was styled to have one curl hanging down the center of his forehead. He had a handsome and boyish face, deep-set eyes, and a Cheshire cat smile. I flipped the album cover to read through the songs that had awaited me. My eyes immediately darted to Beverley, which I couldn't wait to hear since it had been stuck in my head all throughout dinner. I took it over to the record player and turned on the stereo that it was hooked up to. My dad had gone a little crazy the year before and purchased an insane stereo system that was complete with huge speakers. I placed the record needle on the third song, which was Beverley, of course. The first chord strummed, and I closed my eyes, awaiting his voice to fill my ears once again. As he sang the first verse, I felt like I was comfortably drowning in the lyrics, the music filling my brain with an addicting melody. I realized I was gently swaying to the beat, completely immersed in the song. When it was over, I moved the needle to the beginning of the album to listen to the other songs, wondering if I would like them as much as I liked Beverley, if they would entrance me as quickly as the first one had. It's rare for a song to immediately hook you, and usually there are just one or two good songs on an album with the rest being fillers. Once the beat started, it had my attention and my toes tapping. I listened all the way through, my head bobbing along to the music that poured from the speakers. The next song was upbeat and led by the guitar and a baritone saxophone. I was just short of standing up and dancing. It was called Dance With Me, and I was happy to oblige. Instead, I just bounced along while sitting on the floor. Once the lyrics began, I sang along knowing every word, every pause, and every pitch as if I had sung it several times before. Once I realized what I was doing, it scared me. I knew the song, but not that version. It sounded different from what I had imagined it was. I could only remember it acoustically. Where had I heard it before? You know this song? Mom asked me with a confused face. I do, but I was so confused. It was almost in flashes. I knew the song, but didn't know it. Then I did know it, then I didn't. I feel like I only know the guitar version. The guitar version? I don't think there is another version of the song, Mom said. Here, look at the back of the cover and it'll tell you little stories about some of the songs. I looked at the fine print and realized there was a bunch of interesting stuff written. It told of Bobby's life and the true story of Beverley, which was heartbreakingly accurate to the story Dad had explained earlier. Bobby never forgave himself for letting her walk home that night and had yet to marry her at the time that the record was released. The song Dance With Me was one of the first he ever wrote and would often play it on his guitar for Beverley or whoever would listen when he was in high school. After I finished reading the entirety of the back cover, I felt myself wanting to know more about him. I asked my parents several questions, hoping to know as much as I could. After I finished listening to both sides of the record, I was craving more of Bobby Eastland's music. Thankfully, my parents had been fans of his during his heyday and had 3 other albums for me to listen to. However, Dad wanted to watch the San Diego Padres play on television before we went to see fireworks on the bay, which meant no more stereo time for me. Why don't you play them on your record player in your room, Mom suggested. But it doesn't sound as good, I whined. Well, it looks like that's your only choice right now if you want to listen that badly. I scooped up the 3 records and went into my bedroom, shutting the door behind me. My Fisher-Price record player was no match against my dad's stereo setup in the living room, but it would have to do if I wanted to connect with Bobby some more. I hadn't been that obsessed about something since Rainbow Bright hit the scene, and I had to have all the characters from Rainbow Land in my toy box. This was different. It was a pull that came deep within my chest. I needed to hear more Bobby's music. It was as if I had been missing out on something truly special, and I was finally able to hear it. It was a strange feeling that I could never explain. After a couple of hours acquainting myself with Bobby Eastland and his guitar, my mom asked me to go to the bathroom and get ready to see fireworks. We were meeting up with my grandparents, a tradition we did every 4th of July. I regrettably turned off my record player, silencing Bobby for the next few hours. As we rode in our brown Impala, I was momentarily distracted from my new obsession with the excitement of seeing fireworks on the bay. Besides Christmas, it was the highlight of my year getting to watch the colorful explosions in the sky and the reflections on the water. My mom made sure that I brought my sweater since it always became chilly at night, especially being along the Pacific. Once we parked our car a considerable distance from the bay, we started walking to a meeting point where we found my grandparents every year. There was a little seafood shack near the water where we would meet up amidst the sea of people. As we approached, we saw Grandma waving to get our attention. My grandpa had their lawn chairs in his hands and just raised his elbow to wave to us as well. We found a spot in the sand where we would all fit, and my dad handed me a little pink and white folding lawn chair. I always sat in between my mom and Grandma so I could be part of the girls' conversations, although most of the time they were always talking about grown-up stuff that I didn't care about. I zoned out while waiting for the fireworks to start, and Dance With Me began to play in my head again. Except I didn't hear it as it was on the record. Instead, I heard it completely acoustically. Just Bobby's voice and a guitar, as if that was how it was recorded. It was so clear, the words came to me without thinking, and frankly, it creeped me out. However, the song was infectious, and even though it weirded me out, I loved it. I was snapped away from my inner concert when the first pop of a firework blasted in the sky and a brilliant blue illuminated everything around us. Everyone began to cheer and clap as the show was starting. My grandma put her arm around my shoulder and gave it a good rub, mirroring my excitement. The rainbow of blasts came more and more until the show was in full swing. I glanced with a smile at my mom, who was looking upward and had the brilliant reflections in her eyes. The large fireworks garnished a lot of oohs and ahs from the crowds. Their blasts of light were doubled from the reflections in the water. I could see some sailboats in the distance where people had the best seat in the house, away from the crowd, out on the dark water. Once again, it was another memorable 4th of July that would go into my vault of memories.
So that's what I was curious about, whether the story stayed with Melanie as a child or if you were going to follow her throughout her entire life.
Yes. Yeah, it does go throughout her entire life. It starts as her as a child and really becoming connected to this character from the 60s that she had never heard of before. And it starts to creep into her dreams, and she starts dreaming about him and dreaming about herself in a past life. And it does go into a little bit of her teenage years and then goes right into her adult years.
Isn't that something there? How did you even come up with this concept?
It was actually kind of very weird, actually. This book was written very quickly. It was written in about 9 days.
Oh, wow.
And that's the thing with authors, just these ideas hit and it's like they're really strange, but they just kind of work. But I actually had a dream about a singer from the 60s who I've always adored, Del Shannon. And it wasn't like a significant dream. He was just there. I was like, oh, wow, I haven't thought of him in a while. And so the next day I just kind of playing around, Googled him. You know how you do that. You dream about something, then you Google it because it's kind of stuck in your head. Well, it happened to be the 26th anniversary of his death that day. I'm like, oh, that's weird that I dreamt about him. And then you're just kind of sitting there and these little thoughts start swirling in your head. And it was like, It's almost like you visited me in my dream, even though I don't believe in any of that stuff. But that's pretty much how it started, from one little dream one night.
That's incredible. And this may seem crazy, but I feel the same way about Jim Croce.
Rock on.
Yeah. Oh,
Totally.
my God. I love that guy, and I can't explain it.
But that's the thing. You kind of connect to these singers that are not even from your era, but it just kind of grabs you. Like, I grew up solely on oldies, and I'm a kid of the 80s, but my dad wouldn't let me listen to modern music at the time. So I grew up completely on oldies. So my friends are all into, the current pop artists. And then here I'm talking about Del Shannon, Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, all these guys, like they're popular. But Del Shannon was always my favorite. And I hadn't thought of him in a while when I had that dream about him, and it just kind of slapped me in the face, and out came a book. So
yeah. What is it about the oldies that connects with you?
I don't want to say innocence, because there's some songs that there's a little dirty innuendos to them, but it's just the innocence of a different time, I believe. And since that was what I grew up on, even though I'm not from that era, it reminds me of my childhood. So it just kind of sparks the memories of being a kid, even though I'm not from that era,
That's interesting. And again, that's kind of how I felt with Jim Croce. I mean, he inspired me to play guitar, which I still cannot play guitar.
Oh, no. Well, you're probably better than I am. I attempted that, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah. I'm a great piano player. I've been playing piano for 22 years, and I've been playing guitar for 10 years, but it sounds like I haven't been playing at all. So...
Oh, no.
That's how
at
that
least
goes.
You're trying.
Yeah. So it's funny. We actually inadvertently got into the interview portion of the show. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we just started talking, and it just kind of went from there. Actually, I'll just start by saying that it's great to have you on today.
Why, thank you. It's very awesome to be here. Yay.
So everyone has experienced that one song that transports them into another place. But in your story, that's quite literally what's happening with Melanie, your main character.
Right.
So she's experiencing past life regressions? Is that what's happening?
Yeah. At the time when the story begins, she's only 8 years old. So she begins having dreams that are so vivid about the singer, and it's herself, but it's not her. So she's living through some girl who is actually his fiancé. But yeah, she begins having some major past life regression, and it's all coming through dreams, and it goes through her entire life up into adulthood, to the point where it's really starting to drive her crazy that she's trying to figure out why they're connected.
She's just a regular kid. She's not psychic or anything.
Nope. She's just a regular kid doing her thing.
Yeah. And Melanie's only 8 years old. So that lends some authenticity to her visions, meaning that she's revisiting events that are well beyond the scope of an 8-year-old. So logically, they have to be coming from someplace else.
Right, exactly. If you would think about it, if it's real or not, I have no idea. I'm not going to completely debunk it, but I'm not a firm believer in any of that. But my own theory on that is that if there are such things as past lives, you would tend to forget them. But her past life involved somebody who went on to become a famous singer. So as a child, she hears this song, sees his face. It's like lightning goes through her, and she begins to remember everything that happened to her in a past life.
So in a sense, you've really created two stories in one: Melanie's current life, then the story of her past life.
I had to do a little bit of research on what life was like in the 60s. I try to stay true to my stories when I kind of visit the past. I try to stay as authentic as possible. And since I'm not from that era, I kind of had to ask around. But I like revisiting eras that I kind of wish I could go to.
I feel that this was a fitting topic for you to write about because music is very much a part of your life. I think when I met you, you were actually kind of dressed in 50s gear, I think it was.
Heck yes. And when I do events like that, the petticoats and all that fun stuff come out, that's for sure. I love that era. And a lot of the friends I have now are all into music from the 50s and the 60s. And we all just kind of bond together because, they're all like my age. And that's kind of beyond the age group that would be into all that. So it's awesome. I like it.
So what do you really want your readers to get from this story?
Just to connect with how there's always a certain style of music or even an era that they are connected with. And it's a fantasy of being able to transport yourself back into another time. There's also the spectrum of where people have a pull to a different era and they don't know why. And, some say that's because they've had a past life in that era. So maybe it'll make them think about their own lives. And it's like, why do I have such a pull to a certain era? It could be because of a past life. Who knows? There's a lot more to this world that we don't know. So you never know.
Absolutely. And the writing process for you, you said this came to you in just a matter of days to write this story.
Yeah. I haven't written a book this fast in my entire life. Let's see. It was February 8th, and I just started banging it out on my keyboard, and then in 9 days it was done. I've never had a story just kind of pour out that easily without having to stop and think and get stuck on a chapter and be like, okay, what do I do next? And this one just kind of flowed out. And it's also a novella, so it's not as long as a novel, but I figured, there's enough story in there. And this one came straight from the heart and just poured out. So I like how it turned out.
Absolutely. And this is, I think, another example of a story wanting to write itself.
Pretty much.
So is this a standalone story or is it part of a series?
It's a standalone, but it's not a final. So if I end up having another story come to me that could branch off from it, I could easily keep going or even do a prequel. I had thought of doing a prequel to this one that visits Bobby and Beverley during their lives in the 60s, but I haven't had that story come to me as quickly. So I kind of moved on and wrote other stuff instead. So if it hits, it hits. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's okay.
How did writing begin for you? I believe you started writing fantasy at first.
Oh, yeah. I wrote my first story. I have it here sitting on my desk. I had to be in probably 5th or 6th grade. And it's cute. It's a little bound book that we made at school. But I mean, I had been writing stories since I could pick up a pen. The first, quote unquote, book I wrote was about time travel. You had kind of the into the future type stuff and really, really strange. Now that I go back and read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this child.
No, that was just your way of exploring creativity. That's how you develop it.
Exactly. Even in high school, I continued it. And it was in my 20s that, you're in your 20s, you kind of take a break and do other stuff and you're involved in other aspects of life. And so it wasn't until a few years ago that I ended up getting stories swirling around in my head. And I'm like, I got to sit down and write these. So that's what I did.
What advice would you have to up-and-coming writers who may be exploring their creativity as well?
I say write for you. Don't write for what you think your audience wants to read. Don't write for anybody else. Write for you. If it's something that you would want to read, that's what you would write. So all the stories that I've written is something that I would have wanted to read.
Is there anything else that you want to talk about or any events coming up?
Yeah, right now I am currently working on a prequel to my last book, which was The Hop, which it's a time travel book, kind of my own wishful thinking of going back in time and going to all the concerts that I never got to go to, so I'm actually currently writing a prequel to that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw that book online.
Oh, yes, with the time traveling hearse, which is actually my hearse. I do have a hearse. It's one of our family cars.
Oh, wow.
So the hearse on the cover it's my baby. It's parked in the driveway.
Oh, man, I'm sure that gets a lot of looks at the grocery store.
You have no idea. Normally, I have the back decorated all 50s rock. I have all the 45s hanging from it. So it's not a morbid hearse. It's a fun hearse.
Okay.
So, yeah, we get a lot of people stopping us in parking lots to take pictures.
So where can readers find you and your stories online?
You can visit my website, melissazarowski.com. I am also on Amazon and Smashwords. Not a lot of people seem to know about Smashwords, but it's kind of great because you can get it in any digital format. So if you want it in Word, PDF, what have you, or tablet or iPad, you can use Smashwords. But otherwise, a majority of my readers go to Amazon, where you can find everything. And then my fun little website. Yay!
And with that, we'll wrap up another episode. Pleasure talking to Melissa, and I'm looking forward to exploring some of her other books. And if you have a question or comment about this episode or any, or you know an author who you think would be a good fit for this show, let me know. Connect with me on social media or send an email to info@ch1podcast.com. And I probably should have mentioned this before. If you are a podcast or a local business or an individual who is looking to advertise on the show, definitely reach out to me. Okay, that's it for me. Till next time.